security,
Ladies and gentlemen, we're live right now, and we're going live to the United Nations Security Council as the President of the United States is leading the meeting. Let's go there now.
I am honored. The agenda for this meeting is
To chair
of
this
international
meeting
peace
of the
and security,
United Nations
non-proliferation
Security
of weapons of
It
mass
is also my privilege
destruction.
to welcome the
The
distinguished
agenda
heads of state,
is hereby
heads of
adopted.
government, ministers, and other leaders and representatives here with us. Thank you. I also wish to warmly welcome Secretary General Antonio Guterres for joining us. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. The Security Council will now consider item 2 of the agenda. I will make a statement in my capacity as President of the United States of America. It is a great honor to be here today at this UN Security Council briefing to discuss a matter of urgent importance concerning and countering the proliferation of deadly chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them. The nations of the world have long recognized that certain weapons are so dangerous and can inflict so much suffering that all of us have a vital interest in preventing their further development, spread, and use. Since my inauguration, the United States has taken bold action to confront these sinister threats. Many of us are rightly focused on the dangers of nuclear weapons, but we must never forget the risk posed by biological and chemical weapons. The United States was one of the first nations to unilaterally renounce the use of biological weapons, and since World War I, we have led international efforts against the scourge of chemical warfare. Most recently in Syria, we have twice imposed severe consequences on the Assad regime for using chemical weapons against innocent civilians. I want to thank Prime Minister May and President Macron for their country's close partnership in those efforts last April. The Syrian regime's butchery is enabled by Russia and Iran. The Iranian regime exports violence, terror, and turmoil. It illicitly procures sensitive items to advance its ballistic missile program and proliferates these missiles all across the Middle East.
Trump is going
The
after
regime is the world's
President
leading
Assad
sponsor terror
of Syria.
and fuels conflict across the region and far beyond. A regime with this track record must never be allowed to possess a nuclear weapon. For this reason, I announced earlier this year that the United States would withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. This horrible one-sided deal allowed Iran to continue its path towards a bomb and gave the regime a cash lifeline when they needed it the most. They were in big, big trouble. They needed cash. We gave it to them. In the years since the deal was signed, Iran's aggression only increased. The regime used new funds from the deal to support terrorism, build nuclear-capable missiles, and foment chaos. Following America's withdrawal, the United States began reimposing nuclear-related sanctions on Iran. All U.S. nuclear-related sanctions will be in full force by early November. They will be in full force. After that, the United States will pursue additional sanctions, tougher than ever before, to counter the entire range of Iran's malign conduct. Any individual or entity who fails to comply with these sanctions will face severe consequences. I ask all members of the Security Council to work with the United States to ensure the Iranian regime changes its behavior and never acquires a nuclear bomb. With all of this said, I want to thank Iran, Russia, and Syria for, at my very strong urging and request, substantially slowing down their attack on Idlib province and the 3 million people who live there in order to get 35,000 targeted terrorists. Get the terrorists, but I hope the restraint continues. The world is watching. Thank you also to Turkey for helping to negotiate restraint. Anything the USA can do to help resolve this problem in order to save perhaps even hundreds of thousands of lives, maybe more, we are willing and able. We are available to help. In my remarks yesterday to the United Nations General Assembly, I laid out my administration's commitment to building a more just and peaceful future. Regrettably, we found that China has been attempting to interfere in our upcoming 2018 election.
What?
Coming up in November, against my administration. They do not want me or us to win because I am the first president ever to challenge China on trade. And we are winning on trade.
China don't like
We're
this.
winning at every level. We don't want them to meddle or interfere in our upcoming election.
President Trump accusing
As I
China
also
of
mentioned
meddling
yesterday,
in the
we have
midterm
seen
election.
the results of historic efforts to open new pathways to peace on the North Korean Peninsula, and that's something we are extremely proud of. I am pleased to say that North Korea has not conducted a missile test since last November. It has not conducted a nuclear test since last September. And the hostages have been returned to us, and very importantly, the remains of American heroes are now returning home. In June, I held a historic summit with Chairman Kim Jong-un in Singapore, where he reaffirmed his commitment to complete denuclearization. Last week, Chairman Kim reiterated that commitment to President Moon at their third summit and to me in a very strong letter form. I think we will make a deal. But unfortunately, to ensure this progress continues, we must enforce existing UN Security Council resolutions until denuclearization occurs. However, we have detected that some nations are already violating these UN sanctions. This includes illegal ship-to-ship transfers, which must end immediately. The safety of the Korean Peninsula, the region, and the world depends on full compliance with UN Security Council resolutions. Very, very important. But most importantly, I believe that Chairman Kim Jong-un, a man I have gotten to know and like, wants peace and prosperity for North Korea. Many things are happening behind the scenes, away from the media, which nobody knows. But they are happening nevertheless, and they are happening in a very positive way. So I think you will have some very good news coming from North Korea in the coming months and years. I also very much appreciate what President Moon of South Korea had to say about me last night in television interviews. Working with President Moon has been my great honor, and likewise working with President Xi of China and Prime Minister Abe of Japan has been a pleasure and an honor. Each of us follows in the footsteps of countless world leaders, diplomats, and public servants who came here to the United Nations with the same noble goal to build a future worthy of the patriots, true patriots, who sacrificed their lives for our nation and for our future. To be successful, we need a commitment of every nation represented in this chamber. Acting together, we can replace the horrors of war with the blessings of safety and the beautiful promise of peace. Thank you very much. I now resume my function as President of the Security Council and give the floor to the President of France.
So President Trump is laying out violations, especially blaming China for meddling in the 2018 election
Thank you, Mr. President.
and thanking Russia
Dear Donald, dear colleagues,
and Syria for not attacking Idlib
distinguished
in
ministers,
Syria.
dear friends, I would like
Let's
to
go right
first
now.
of all
The
thank the US
French
presidency of the
President
Security
Macron
Council.
is speaking.
Thank you for having brought us here today to discuss the serious threats to international peace and security, which are represented indeed by the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and their means of delivery. I would like to thank the Secretary General for being present with us here today. The first issue on here that comes to my mind when we consider the divisions, frankly, that we have had in the past year on such issues, for example, as a nuclear issue or the chemical weapons used by the Syrian regime, is the following question: what is it that we, member states of the Security Council, can do together? The non-proliferation regime, which organizes the control of new nuclear weapons in order to limit the danger of nuclear war, or which places an absolute ban on certain weapons and does this to ensure that our people never experience the horrors of being gassed or bacteriological attacks. This is a relatively recent construction, and it came into maturity in the 1990s. And it was the result of the tragedies of the 20th century, the firm determination of our predecessors, of their vision of the good of humankind and their spirit of responsibility. And this edifice that they constructed is born by mutual concessions, interdependence, and mutual trust that we have built together. In a word, it is based on a multilateral approach to security. Our responsibility, and I believe in it very deeply today, is that we owe this to our people. What we owe to them is to preserve and strengthen this regime at the time when it is being seriously tested. And member states of the Council have to be exemplary in this regard. And in my view, on this issue and many others, we have to stand together. And we were together remarkably so on the issue of North Korea. And last time it was in December 2017 when we passed Resolution 2397. The way of managing this crisis, and this was just recalled by the President of the United States, has gone through a new stage thanks to his initiative to have a direct dialogue with the chairman of the Workers' Party of Korea. And we welcome and support these efforts, as well as the efforts made in this regard by South Korea. At no point should the Security Council lose sight of the fact that North Korea continues representing a nuclear and ballistic threat for the region and for the world. We expect for the Pyongyang regime specific actions showing that they're genuinely determined to dismantle their nuclear and ballistic program, and to do so in a way which is comprehensive, verifiable, and irreversible. As we await such gestures, such actions, our dialogue has to be accompanied by rigorous implementation of the sanctions decided upon by the Council.
So France's President Macron, he wants to be sure that that there's verification. He wants to be sure there's verification that Kim Jong-un is going to truly denuclearize. He hears what President Trump is saying, that there's been great progress, and he's thankful for the South Koreans and the Japanese and the Chinese that have been involved in the process with America, led by President Trump. But he wants to be sure that there will be verification and international control of this. Let's go back to President Macron of France.
But it is a decisive step in that exact direction. A serious crisis of confidence was opened by a reimposition of extraterritorial sanctions by the United States, but Tehran continues abiding by its nuclear obligations. Well, this situation has to be countered by the respect of all of the provisions of JCPOA and its resolutions by all members of the UN, and not just by France, Germany, and the UK. We also have to go further than the current framework. And I've already stated the same a year ago. And that is why I agree the goals are recalled by the President of the United States, even if we can disagree on the methods as regards JCPOA. But I think that we need to build together a long-term strategy in order to manage this crisis. And it cannot boil down to just sanctions and containment. We need to have the basis for new negotiations, and created first by the framework we create for the Iranian nuclear issue beyond 2025 and 2030, and on the issue of the increase of Iran of the scope and the accuracy of their ballistic missiles. So we have to frame their ballistic issue, secondly, and thirdly, the regional stability. It's all of these components that can be part of an international strategy in order to reduce the dangers for the region and also attain the goal that we all want, namely that Iran does not ever obtain a nuclear weapon. We were also united on the issue of eliminating Syrian chemical weapons. This was in Resolution 2118, but that was in 2013. Since then, the threats for the credibility of the ban have accumulated. The reappearance of chemical weapons during the offensives by the Syrian regime at the time when Damascus had adhered to the convention banning that and declared their program did not encounter the needed determination from the Council. Daesh, as far as they're concerned, have used those weapons in Syria and Iraq. And in February 2017, in Malaysia, a member of the North Korea leader's family was assassinated with the use of a neurotoxin, VX. And this year, it was on the United Kingdom territory, and therefore in the European Union, that another neurotoxin was used, and this resulted in a death and an injury for 4 other people. France recalls here that we share the British analysis, according to which there is no other plausible explanation here other than that the responsibility is with Russia, and it's up to Russia to take all the necessary measures in order to make cease this threat. We launched on the 23rd January 2018 an international partnership against the impunity of using chemical weapons. And all of the states are invited to join this initiative.
So now President Macron is going to blame Russia, of course, for the poisoning, that radiation poisoning that happened in the United Kingdom. And I'm pretty impressed, actually, that the French president would actually confront Russia with this issue and 100% blame Russia. Now, Russia has said that they did not do this intentionally, that this was a rogue act by maybe, and they're not even sure who may have done it. But certainly the blame is falling on Russia's lap by the French. And let me just say, this is in right after the fact that a French frigate fired a missile and may have been what shot down the Russian plane. The Israelis did not shoot down that Russian plane a few days ago. It was believed that the Syrians shot that plane down, but now we're hearing that the French fired a missile from a French frigate in the Mediterranean. They may have accidentally shot it down, or was it an accident at all? Do we really know? Let's go back to French's President Macron at the United Nations Security Council.
How many other countries will have this weapon? In the Middle East, the ballistic assistance provided to Hezbollah and to Houthis is a new and alarming development. It has to stop before they further destabilize a region which is already tense. Fighting Daesh confirmed that the terrorist groups are interested in the weapons of mass destruction. The threat of nuclear or radiological terrorism has not disappeared, despite the leadership that has been shown by the United States here with the summit conducted on nuclear security. France calls that we continue international cooperation here. It's more necessary now than ever. Mr. President, we will continue strictly abiding by our commitments under the international non-proliferation regime and will continue strengthening the various institutions which form its backbone. In particular, we will continue to support the efforts made by the United Nations and its experts and will bring the issue of combating nuclear, chemical, biological, and ballistic proliferation during our presidency of G7 in 2019. And for this, I call for our unity and the spirit of responsibility, because the non-proliferation regime is the backbone of our system of collective security. We kept building it decade after decade. It's still young. It requires our mobilization, our spirit of responsibility, and our unity. I thank you.
I thank the President of France for his statement. Thank you very much. I now call on the President of Poland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Distinguished Mr. President.
I think what we just seen here, just for a moment now, is the fact that the French president is also saying, let's verify that North Korea is going to denuclearize, and let's make sure that international nations and inspectors have a chance to help verify this. And I think it's good. I think the French president's correct, and President Macron. We also heard Macron blame the Russians for the chemical weapons that have been floating around out there, whether they be in Damascus, Syria with Assad, or they be the chemical weapons used on those former British spies there in Great Britain and London. So France is wanting to make sure Russia gets a little bit of blame here, a little bit of dirt on the Russians when it comes to chemical weapons use. And he wants to put the blame there. Now let's see what the Polish president is saying at the UN Security Council being chaired by the President of the United States.
Is a crime. It does not matter whether it's used on a mass scale by undemocratic regimes against their own people to secure their power, or it's used in a state terrorist manner against individuals abroad on whom a certain state wants to take revenge. And if it is a crime, it means that the principal obligation of the international community is defined by the rule-based order. Criminals must be brought to justice. No single act of use of the chemical weapon can be left unanswered, since it undermines not only the basic sense of justice, but also leads to the erosion of the non-proliferation and disarmament regimes, and in consequence threatens the security of all of us. Brutal attacks, directed mostly against civilians, all have the same aim: to intimidate the international community. The community of the UN cannot accept such methods. Our inaction will only encourage perpetrators. I hope that the finalization of the new EU sanction mechanism, completed in the framework of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, will allow us to exercise appropriate pressure on current and future perpetrators, as well as deter them from these unacceptable actions. We all hope to have chemical weapons effectively banned by the Chemical Weapons Convention. We must stand firmly behind our own rules and norms, which are the pillars of the international order. In this context, let me mention that, as in the previous years, Poland will introduce in the United Nations General Assembly a draft resolution on the implementation of the Chemical Weapons Convention. It is of great importance to preserve the integrity of this regime. Therefore, we call on all member states to ensure a strong, clear, and united message of support of the whole international community for the integrity of the Chemical Weapons Convention and the efforts of the Organization for the Prohibition of the Chemical Weapons. The second issue I would like to highlight is the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Permit me to make 3 points regarding this matter. Firstly, we all know that nuclear weapons cannot be brought on the free market. Therefore, every act of proliferation of these weapons is a failure of both the international community and the rule-based world order. And we must remember that it always involves not only the state that develops nuclear capacity, but also those who provide it with means to achieve it, namely technology, materials, and resources. It's of utmost importance for every agreement that aims at controlling nuclear programs to guarantee that they are used solely for peaceful purposes. We have an obligation to evaluate those agreements against the purposes and to act accordingly. We should not turn our heads back from those who act against the Non-Proliferation Treaty by providing means to develop nuclear weapon capacity or assist in other ways in developing it.
President of Poland is being very diplomatic here, but he's doing a great job in saying we really don't need nuclear weapons or chemical weapons at all anywhere in the world, and it should only be for peaceful purposes like nuclear energy. So he's basically taken a macro view that we need to really get rid of this nuclear capability as it relates to warfare and work together as nations. So I have to give him credit. He's also sending a clear message here that the United States and Russia should not start ramping back up on nuclear weapons. And we know that behind the scenes, I think both countries have been doing that, including the Chinese.
Fundamental component of the nuclear non-proliferation regime and plays an indispensable role in the implementation of the NPT. Secondly, I would like to welcome the prospect of the process of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We have seen some encouraging developments, such as the inter-Korean summits and the meeting of Kim Jong-un with the President Donald Trump. This led to the stopping of the missile and nuclear tests. And I would like to stress, Mr. President, that this is in tremendous measure your and President Moon's great achievement and merit. So thank you very much. However, the decisive steps are yet to be made. The lasting peace will not be achieved without the denuclearization of the North Korea in a complete, verifiable, and irreversible manner. Until then, the international community must remain united in maintaining real and consistent pressure on the North Korea, including by upholding UN sanctions regime. Thirdly, for the credibility of international community, it's vital to stand firmly behind duties and obligations we took in our shoulders. In that context, let me sadly reflect on the concerning developments of security situation in our region, Central and Eastern Europe. Only in the last few years, we have witnessed the clear breach of the Budapest Memorandum that guaranteed territorial integrity of Ukraine in exchange of its peaceful and voluntary denuclearization. We have also heard about the use of nuclear weapons to end conventional conflicts. Equally alarming was the deployment of a dual-capable means of delivery close to our borders. All these actions have significantly contributed to the deterioration of the security environment. Ladies and gentlemen, what should be our response to the challenges I have just listed? First, the full and firm implementation of the well-established and widely recognized treaties and norms of the international law. Second, support and full confidence for the work of international mechanisms responsible for preventing of the use of weapons of mass destruction. Finally, proactive and constructive engagement in initiatives which aim at fighting with proliferation efforts and promoting transparency and verification. In 2018, my country assumed the chairmanship of the second preparatory committee for the 2020 review conference of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and chaired the Hague Code of Conduct against ballistic missile proliferation. Our efforts have been focused on strengthening these regimes, their universalization, securing the widespread and credible verification mechanism, implementation of good practices, as well as tightening the international cooperation. These actions constitute long-term objectives of the Polish security policy. In conclusion, let me stress once again that non-proliferation is a collective effort to uphold the security architecture which we have built for decades and to prevent the nightmares recurring uses of weapons of mass destruction. We need full commitment of all of us, without any exception, to observe all norms and obligations in this field. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
So the
much, Mr.
President of France-
And I now give the floor to the President of Equatorial Guinea. Please. Thank you.
So the president of France doing a good job in making sure everyone understands that denuclearization and has to happen in North Korea. He's praising President Trump and President Moon of South Korea for their work, and he wants to be sure the Russians don't get involved anymore in chemical weapons if they did at all. Let's go to the president of Ecuador.
An honor to address for the first time in person this forum on behalf of and in representation of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea. We thank the United States
Ecuador of Guinea
for having convened this open debate this morning, and we congratulate the United States on their excellent work as President of the Council for the month of September. Disarmament is one of the longest-standing goals of the United Nations. Indeed, it was the subject of the very first Security Council resolution on the 25th of January 1946, when the Security Council adopted Resolution 1 of the United Nations Security Council, enshrined in Article 47 of the Charter of the United Nations. 72 years have elapsed since the adoption of the aforementioned resolution by the Security Council, and today the world is once again caught up in an arms race, which has led many states to feel themselves compelled to acquire a range of weapons of all kinds for their defense, and more specifically has led them feeling compelled to obtain weapons of mass destruction in some instances. Nuclear arsenals do not just serve to exacerbate tensions between states and to hinder the drive for peace, but they also put in jeopardy the very continued existence of humankind. Our country, the Republic of Equatorial Guinea, does not possess, nor does it intend ever to acquire, weapons of mass destruction, and we have adopted measures to guarantee the strict and full implementation of the commitments and obligations that we bear to the international community in the sphere of non-proliferation. We have ratified the African Treaty for the establishment of a nuclear weapon-free zone in our continent, a treaty that is better known as the Treaty of Pelindamba.
Now, the situation you have here is the Ecuador Guinea country wanting to make sure that nuclear weapons, they'd like to just see nuclear weapons completely be removed from the face of the earth. In the real world, that's not going to happen. But I think that what you're seeing here is an overall, I'm kind of stunned, really, because you can see there's been very little discussion about, I've not heard the word Israel, which is usually what these guys do is they get together and they all beat up on Israel. Israel has been flying into Syria and has been bombing Iranian locations in Syria. Over 200 times they have admitted they've done this in the last 18 months. Yet nobody wants to challenge that because they realize the Iranians want to annihilate Israel. And so instead, everybody's going to focus on North Korea and do denuclearization of nuclear weapons, and that they can make the world a safer place. And it also shows that Trump's powerful position of protecting Israel is so strong that for the first time at a UN Security Council meeting, Israel's not a problem, okay? You don't normally see this, folks. You have to understand, normally, these United Nations Security Council meetings like this are always attacking of Israel. So we are seeing a change. The winds of change are blowing. Trump's muscle is working right now to focus the world on the areas that are of greater importance, like North Korea and nuclear weapons, or Russia, or Assad of Syria, or some other nation, any nation that would want to use chemical weapons. So Iran is still getting a free pass, and it's yet to see if they continue to have a free pass. Let's go back to the council.
As well as to ensure implementation of and compliance with Security Council Resolution 1540 of 2004. There is also a need to lend support to the Proliferation Security Initiative, to the Global Initiative to Combat Nuclear Terrorism. Action is also needed to ban any test of nuclear weapons, to share information between states and international organizations. There is also an urgent and pressing need to implement systems of joint verification, inspection, and oversight for arsenals and research facilities of this type of weapons, and such verification should be undertaken by the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs in partnership with the International Atomic Energy Agency. And this verification, inspection, and oversight work should include securing such weapons and ensuring their destruction. In addition, there is a pressing need to pursue negotiations with nuclear weapon possessor states in order to ensure that they rule out effectively and genuinely the option of using nuclear weapons. Steps must also be taken to ensure that their nuclear arsenals are secured, and the rights of all parties to make peaceful use of nuclear energy must be recognized and upheld. President, the Republic of Equatorial Guinea is alarmed because the United Nations seems to be in a paradoxical situation. There seems to be a disconnect between steps taken here in this House and actions taken by some states claiming their sovereignty, which is undermining what should be an action of partnership and solidarity. Some 2 days ago, we had an extraordinary summit to remember the extraordinary African leader Nelson Mandela, and we all spoke out to reject confrontation and war, to set aside disputes, to live up to his legacy. And in living up to the legacy of Nelson Mandela, we expressed the hope that we might be able to live in a world of peace, security, development, and well-being for all. However, it seems that many states have chosen rather to pursue the path of arms and weapons, which runs directly counter to the noble and lofty aspirations of the Mandela Summit, a summit which we all welcomed and all participated in. It is possible to ban weapons of mass destruction and to render their use unthinkable. All that is needed is the necessary will and determination of all parties. The Republic of Equatorial Guinea voices its determination to continue working towards the negotiation and adoption of legally binding instruments that will lead to nuclear disarmament in an effective, irreversible, and verifiable way in order to achieve the objective of the complete elimination of all nuclear weapons. The international community of nations should also be worried by the potential humanitarian consequences and the global impact of any accidental or intentional nuclear detonation. And the international community of nations should cooperate on the level of international security to prevent non-state actors from getting their hands on the resources necessary for them to be able to pursue nuclear terrorism. President, the Republic of Equatorial Guinea is persuaded of the usefulness of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes and used under the supervision of the IAEA. I conclude this statement delivered on behalf of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea by sharing with you that in our region, our continent, Africa, there are not, nor have there ever been used, weapons of mass destruction. What has caused enormous loss of life and bloodshed in our continent is the trafficking in weapons, terrorism, and the conflicts that have racked and left a stain on our continent. For this region, I would urgently request you to support the African Union in its noble objective of financing for peacekeeping operations led by the African Union on a case-by-case basis. I appeal directly to the members of the Security Council, asking them to lend their support for a financing mechanism for peace and security operations led under mandates of the Security Council, given that so doing would contribute to international peace and security, which is the principal goal of this august body, the Security Council of the United Nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I now give the floor to the President of Bolivia. Thank you.
President of the United States of America, my brother Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, fellow presidents, brothers and sisters of the Security Council. The presidency of the Security Council has convened the members of this body to a discussion on the non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction today. Bolivia hails from a region which has been duly declared nuclear weapon-free for more than half a century now. For this reason, I think I am in a position to recall Article number 1 of the Treaty prohibiting the use of nuclear weapons, which states...
So once again, we have Bolivia now, and their president is also focused on elimination of nuclear weapons worldwide, which really is what most nations would say and would love to see, because you're really talking about just the superpowers, United States, the Russians, the Chinese, primarily have the majority of the nuclear weapons in the world. You can throw in some more countries that have a few, but at the end of the day, it's really all about the United States, the Russians, and the Chinese. And so this council is focused on denuclearization, bringing down the numbers of nukes worldwide, wishing they could eliminate them. That'll never happen. But at least there's a focus here on trying to recognize the horrific dangers of nuclear attack or nuclear explosions and what it would mean to humanity. I think this session, again, I'm stunned. Israel is not a problem this year, and I've never seen that before. It is the 70th year of Israel's existence, but once again, I think it shows the strength of President Trump to defend the nation of Israel, to stand with Israel. Israel's focused on taking Iran out of Syria, and the focus here is about nuclear weapons or other issues like chemical weapons. So we pretty well are done covering this event. It will continue to go on. I think some of the other nations yet to speak will be saying basically the same thing. I think the big news is here. Trump has went ahead and has told us his position as it relates to several things. And we will talk about those in our live broadcast. Also, France has made a little bit of news here, putting some blame on Russia. And Trump has made a little bit of news here, blaming China for meddling in the 2018 elections that's coming up for the midterms. So we're going to finish this broadcast, and we'll be back at 12 noon Eastern for a full update on all the world events going on around the world. I'll see you at 12 noon.
International peace, security, and justice that we are seeing. Let us take the example of Iran.